I want to start with this beautiful portrait, Audrey Hepburn. And the first thing I want to do is show you one quick thing about portrait drawing. So we have this beautiful pose from Simplist, and I'm just going to really quickly sketch. This is just a warm-up. I'm loosening up. I want to capture that basic shape, and we know it's an egg shape. But what I think is important to understand before you start a portrait, while you draw your portrait, to always keep in mind is this. We have a center line. So when you have a profile, we don't see the center line. But because this is not a full profile, we see the other side, the other eye. You want to visualize and see the line that goes right down the center of the forehead, right down the middle of the nose, right through the middle of the lips. And ideally, you want to also capture the tilt. So visualizing the three-dimensional aspect of the foundation of your drawing. Then from here, we could simply do a quick line study, straight line study, and you see how it almost starts coming together. Now there's variations to the angle, of course. And in order to capture that perfect pose, we'll go usually to the same formulas that we've done for portrait studies, which is center line. The eye line is in the center or midway from top of the head to the bottom, the chin. This would be the midpoint, and then we would divide this in halves as well to give you just an idea where all of these line up. And there you have it. So once we have, oopsie, I'm off the center line. So once we have this, you can actually begin composing and then detailing the rest of your portrait. But very, very helpful tip to actually just grab a sheet of paper, and before you start, this is actually scrap paper, and maybe play with the same. This is a blind, 90% blind, quick, almost negative study in order to capture that gesture, and then a combination of methods to capture that pose. So today's portrait, this one here, it does help you study these and come up with a formula from those rules that we've discussed over and over to make your drawing easier. But if you want to, and I'm going to just erase this very quickly, got a little bit of graphite on this paper. As my warm-up drawing, I am going to grab one of these markers. And I'm going to probably be using this today for one of the drawings, which is a brush pen or a tip pen. And I'm going to use the tip pen, and I'm going to create a nice, let's make this a 3 to 5 minute blind contour drawing. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I have a nice reference. I'm going to set this over here by the side and really play with 100% blind contour. Try to see that negative space, become a little bit more familiar. Remember, my joke is, even if it looks like a foot, in the end, oh, but it was supposed to be a portrait. It looks like a foot. Totally fine. What it is, I should have started this way. Let me look at my paper and go the opposite way. And what you want to do here is basically just get familiar. Let your eyes and your hand say, oh, I guess we're doing that thing. We're drawing. We're looking at space, and we're looking at relationships between shapes, negative space shapes, line shapes. And do it as slow as possible. And maybe do a few of them. I always recommend, see, there's my silhouette, and I feel very comfortable that it was captured. There's a lot of nuance here where we could go into, and this is where we get more usually more tight. So this is not 100% blind drawing. This is more 80, 90%. But just enough to become familiar with our pose, with our features, and with allowing yourself some time to, maybe get some ideas on how this may work a different way, a way that you like, maybe change your mind about the medium. But overall, it's basically just to get familiar and to wake up your senses. Give them a chance to loosen up, lose that stiffness. And there we have it. Well, that's, I would say, I would be happy with that as a quick just warm-up sketch. I do have a little brush where I could also bring in, because it's a water-soluble pen, I could do a little bit of a wash, some of these areas, play with some of these shadows, do a little bit of the volume. And this could be something very interesting, something I'm recommending a lot for you to visit, revisit different techniques with different mediums in order to get the most out of them. So right now I'm just looking at light, shadows, doing a little bit of that type of study, beginning to get more and more familiar with what's going to happen in here, even though it's just at this point sort of a little bit random, and it's not going to go much darker than this. But notice me picking up just a little bit of this ink and pulling it over into the cheekbone, right over here to the side of our nose, very softly to the edge. We can begin to actually not just think about, but identify, recognize what light is doing. Oh, look, it's coming from this side, from the top, and we want to just play a little bit with this. And this could actually be a really interesting way to work the portrait. And there we have it. So call that your 5-minute study. And bring this over to our final drawing. Now for this one, you could actually keep using something like this. When you're happy with something like this, a quick sketch that is so loose, you could actually see yourself doing more. Well, you could then bring in, once it's dry, some of these ink pens and work out some of the extra shapes, some of the extra contrast, and what we would generally focus on, that detail. It's still a little bit wet, but just a few of those touches would make this look really interesting, closer to finished. And look how fast that was. So always highly recommend loosen up, get familiar with your medium, and loosen up the way you see and your hand. So the next one I want to do is a version using Bristol paper. I am going to, I guess, kind of repeat the same, but I wanted to show you another version of a method of drawing. When you want to get the drawing skills out of the way so you can get to the technical aspect of spending an hour, 2 hours drawing, what you do is you can use carbon paper or graphite on the back of the copy. And what you're going to do is you're going to want to tape it. Make sure you hold it. And what I'm going to do very quickly here, using a hard pencil, in this case, I'm going to use my mechanical pencil. What I want to do is just put some markers here. So I'm going to scratch the edge. I want to check if it is. Yep, you can see there a couple lines. And I want to just give myself some markers. So most of them would be that blind contour. Now, what you want to do is you don't want to draw every feature. What I'm focusing more on, yes, a little bit of the outline, but more on the shadow elements, like the darker, for example, here, this cast shadow under the ear, some of the shadows within the ear, and some of the points that will allow me to place the features or some of the lines exactly as I would want to see them, with a little bit of shadow study, some of the elements, and just the negative space and the angle. I've discussed this over and over. Many people would call this cheating, but it isn't. It's just another tool for you to make your drawing efficient. So if it's not drawing structure, drawing foundations, likeness, but just a quick way to set yourself up. And a lot of professional artists, most, I would say, professional artists actually use this tool and do incredible things. You would include some of the Renaissance artists. Vermeer, for example, used camera obscura. And if he could have done this, I'm sure he would have, and give us something amazing. So there it is. We have a little bit of, just a couple of clues. And, well, most people say, well, the drawing is done. You have everything in there. Well, no. Now is where you want to bring in, I'm just going to move this a little bit to the side. There we are. And I'm going to start from lightest to darkest. So using these markers, and we've been using washes and water-soluble inks or water-soluble watercolor pencils, water-soluble graphite. What I want to do is create a couple of washes using 3. This is a light gray, medium gray, and a dark. And it's not a black, it's a dark gray. And begin to render some of these. I'm going to have to test it first as the lightest. So I'm going to go between marker and right into the brush. And remember, I'm not working on watercolor paper. I'm working on Bristol. So it'll give me another interesting characteristic. And I hope you can see there how it's working. So beginning the read of, okay, where would I start with extra light? I want to, maybe, I don't want to redo areas. And what I mean by that is, if I have what I consider a light area that is then going to be layered becoming darker, well, I'm going to waste that work. So what I want to do now is just focus on some of the touches. I'm going to leave a lot of white and create that early, simple transition where you see most of the light beginning to curve into the shadows. So it's very soft. It's mostly here around the nose, up in the forehead, under the eye, and on the cheekbone. Some down here on the, let's use the tip, on the side of the lip. But most of it could remain as the white of the paper. Just a bit under the eye. So visualizing, how am I going to use this so I could blend from light white paper through this light gray into those darker shadows and eventually some heavy lines that are ink lines. So you begin to see a mapping. Let's go into a more saturated, this medium gray. And what I want to start doing is working some of these lines on the hair. So as I do washes, I also want to begin to think about the shape and the line that shows, which is why I would be using these markers. And just slowly, what I'm thinking about right now is adding Not the dark of the hair, but the light hitting the hair. So there's obviously space between them, but you'll immediately see how much darker it is. And this is a chance, if you do something like this, where you could become more playful with it. Make your washes more abstract. As you let them sit, they can reveal something interesting that you could then use or begin to enhance. I'm going to softly bring this shadow right here under, from the neck under the jaw into the upper area of the face. So it's if you haven't done it before, something that you need to practice. As you see it come together, you may find yourself saying, ooh, I should have done this layer first. So there are steps to it, but testing it and practicing it is what allows you to see those tricks and how they work and how you would slowly put them together. So I was planning to do this one just a little bit faster so I can get to the graphite. And it's going to be obviously a little easier because I am using this image transfer technique. You don't spend so much time putting together the drawing. You just gave yourself some clues, some hints. Still using the medium gray, and it will be a little more saturated once I bring in that light, the darkest. And begin to build up that contrast. Now there are so many beautiful ink, water-soluble ink mediums or graphite that create washes for you to really maximize their use. And I could begin to see all of this volume and all of the value changes that I can create there. So coming up with a way to use them and the techniques of timing when you use these mediums is also crucial. So here we go. I'm going into the darkest and I begin to draw with it, thinking just a little more, again, about texture, so the quality of some of these lines, and overall, the saturation quality as well. How dark do I need to, how much material, how much ink do I need to add and put in here in order for this to read and give me an idea of the light that I hope to achieve. Remember, looseness is your friend. Looseness all the way through with the line, with the washes. The fact that, again, I'm using Bristol paper, not watercolor, is creating these unexpected combinations of washes that I somehow expected, but they're always surprising. They always give you something interesting. So here we are. We're going to add a little more material, more ink to this area. So this is almost silhouetting and just pulling the ink out of the line to begin to create a little shape, although I like that. And we're going to add a little more volume here. A little more shadow here. And how much of this is blind drawing? When I draw a line, almost all of it. When I do washes, 80% of it. I want to keep track of the water and the wash, but I'm looking at my reference. Otherwise, how do I know what the light is doing? How do I know to direct my brush in order to get that look? It's beautiful to work with this because you could see it coming together in layers as I added more material, and the combination of those two and what they did, still way from unfinished. But you could begin to see how, and the idea of this was something so, well, to this point, in heavy contrast with the delicate face. Very, very delicate features of a face is going to be very challenging. And that was the whole point, to try something like this. I'm going to combine the first and second layer with a little extra line right here. And remember, my plan also is once all the washes are dry, I'm going to be bringing in some ink pens, some of those ink liners, or maybe even these, up to a point where they are maybe just a little too thick. But already you begin to see, lots of places I could just leave it. And it is solved. I'm almost tempted now to just minimize the amount of contrast and line here. We do see from very dark blacks in the hair and in the sweater to the light white areas of the face. I want it to be a little more playful, a little more delicate in terms of transition. And how do you do that? You minimize, you lessen the saturation. Although you could go even darker black. It's not full black. I'm leaving some space, and the wash is really coming together. Really, really nice. There we are. So I think I'm ready to go into the features. And maybe a little more here. This, just to balance it out. It does need just that feel of flowy, lighter hair. And the volume. So using very loose, almost broken brush strokes, trying to mimic the volume of the hair. There we have it. So for the face, the features of the face, I'm going to go back to the medium gray. I already used lots of light gray, and I hope you could see those touches there. And I'm going to start with them, even with some of the darker areas. Starting with the eyebrows. And I want to just almost begin to just dot some of these touches, almost like stippling, because I am not too sure of how heavy and how I could control the values. We have big issues here with this light dark side of the other side of the nose. And then I'm going to add a little bit to the lips as well, since they're much darker. So using a paper towel, because here I really want to control that. And I am using a water pen brush, so I can try to control that a little bit better. We're going to begin to see the shaping. Ooh, beautiful. I love this. Just a little space of white and it just immediately gave us that light sensation. So what I'm looking for is the volume. And how do I create volume? Well, the illusion of volume is created by light and shadow, how it occupies space. And according to where the light source is coming from, we read the light, the shadow, and it defines the form and the space. So the best reading of value, along with capturing those shapes in that value, you begin to see a round face facing away from the light with a little tilt upwards. And again, what I always recommend, abstraction. Identifying small little areas, isolating them, seeing them as abstract, getting your mind to a place where there are no words to describe it other than the shape and the value, not a thing. And the beauty of it, seeing it as if you're seeing it for the first time ever. Which in many ways you are. So that did really well. And I'm going to go into a final wash with the darker. Now this is trickier because it's going to be just maybe a dot here and there, since these light grays are working so beautiful. You really do not want to overdo it, or I know I don't want to, because of that soft transition and how it's working here. I could literally count the dots here. I am not occupied or not preoccupied with line, because I'm going to come back later. And those ink lines will, with the fine liners, will basically solve all other issues. Ooh, yeah. This really got dark very quick. So the transition, that's where you want a paper towel to remove some of it, to control it just a little bit better. Got beautiful specks of light there, which almost wants me going a little bit slower. Seeing how I can make better use of that. And how much I did add just a little too much media here, too much ink. So softening that up. And as I always said, you start big, simple, and light. And as you work your way to the end, it gets darker, but also smaller and more complex. And you need to read it just a little bit more careful. The opposite. You want to start not fast, but loose. And then as you reach this stage, you want to slow down. You want to analyze, make better decisions because they're less, they're minimal, but they do affect a lot because they affect everything else that you've done already. There we have it. So far, so good. I would actually, if I had one, I would bring in one of those white jelly pens and touch some white light in the area of the nose, some on the lips. The lips would actually, the highlights on the lip here would really just totally complete it. And finally, I would do some of this work here with the smallest ink pen I have. I'm going to add some of these eyelashes. Now you definitely want to wait for this to be fully dry. Some of them are not eyelashes, they're the shadow of the eyelashes. Some touches right at the edge of the nose and nostril and lip. We do have some here, don't need much. Whether you cross-hatch or scumble, really try to achieve beautiful, soft transitions. I'm saying one more, and I'm just going to go all the way back to the lightest and do it quickly, just adding a little extra shadow, light shadow, to this area of the cheekbone right into the mouth here. Creating just a little extra roundness to this side of the face. Oh, there it is. And I could do the same just here at the edge of the forehead. And right here underneath the other shadow. Perfect. Happy and ready to move on to the next. So this was a quick study with a nice approach of image transfer so I could focus on the washes and how to work values with 3 separate water-soluble inks. And again, this, you don't need 3 of these. If you don't have it, you could just use a pen that is water-soluble and wash it away, make it 3 different values. There we go. From here to here, that's a big jump. So for our final, I'm going to bring all of these materials here, and I want to show you what I have. So I'm using, it's sort of a Bristol pen paper. It's mixed media, sketchbook paper. It's a nice, soft, for blending, it's perfect for graphite. So what I'm going to use, materials I'm going to be using are several of my pencils, starting with the 6H. I have a 9H, but I'm not going to use that. It makes no sense. This would be 6H, 4H, 2H, and I'm going to work my way from HB through 2B, 4B, 6B, and maybe all the way to 8B. And that's how I want to work the values on graphite. I'm going to be using kneaded eraser. I'll probably be using also regular polymer eraser. Have my sharpener so I can really make sure I have sharp pencils every time I add graphite to the page. I have this pen eraser, which is refined. I'll do that to draw the light in. And I have this smaller one, which is a Tombow Mono Zero, which is literally a pen that you can draw light back into your drawing. I also have a brush, very soft. This is one of these cheap acrylic or watercolor brushes. And for some of the blending that I'm going to need here, especially in the smaller areas of the features, those lightest areas that go into white, it's going to be perfect. And if that, you also have a paper blender. So I'm going to be using that for the big blends. So starting with 6H pencil, I have my image transfer. So you see some marks here, barely, but I do have an image transfer already, just some dots and dashes, lines applied here. And lastly, I want to show you this. It's a woodless graphite pencil. This is an HB, and it really comes in handy when some soft blending. Very, very nice. Absolutely want to have it as sharp as possible. So this is a really sharp point. You can sharpen it just like a pencil as well, and it works really, really nice. Okay. So where would I start? With the 6H, have my reference by my side, and this is the only thing I'm going to say over and over and over. Caress your paper. Understand what you're trying to do in terms of value. Identify the shape of that value, and then at your pace. So understanding your pace is what matters. What is the pace and the pressure that you wish to bring to the paper? What is the pressure that you need for that to work according to what you see? And the answer almost always is low light pressure. Show you right over here. It absolutely is about the direction of the line. It has to do with the repetition on an area in order to saturate. How much saturation? So I'm beginning to see it from lightest to darkest, and I'm trying to get from absolute light, which is at the edge of that nose, into the cheekbone, and I'm just working my way around the area of the eyes, but I'm not thinking eyes, and the area of the nose. And as usual, we said we want to start with biggest, simplest, but I want to see those light areas that go into the mid-tones, mid-grays, and beginning to ease into shadows. And there's some really nice dips into cast shadow and curved shadow. They're small shapes, but they all happen right around the eyes, right underneath the nose, and around the lips. But they go fast. They go from light, mid-tone, boom, to shadow, to dark. So you want to take care, see that shape, and slowly caress the graphite onto the paper. Now you can begin to see how the direction of your pencil marks, whether it's crosshatch, whether you are scumbling, you do want to blend. So in between, this is really too light to blend right now, but I want to show you how slowly I want to blend some of these areas that I've drawn, added some graphite to. So you could begin to see how volume begins to, the illusion in your mind begins to hold. And oh wow, look at the roundness, look at the light. I could almost predict where the shadow is going to do next. How it's going to appear real. The reason I'm working with a 6H is because when I go to full render, to full contrast, they are going to almost disappear. But the fact that they're there and they're not white, the white of the paper, is going to do wonders for that likeness, that delicate, and what we generally call realism. So I'm going for some nice, call it a really extreme light study. We're studying the light on this portrait. I'm going to add some of it here as we see the area of the lips, or what will be the lips. I want to put some of this media, some of this graphite, a little streakier, but gaps so I could have it as the light on the lip. And there'll be some hints of pure white, bringing with an eraser just back to the white of the paper for those couple of highlights right at the edge here, the lower lip. Now, how long do I have to work with this pencil? When do I move to the next? Well, it's a matter of patience, really. How patient can you be? And how much time do you want to spend on rendering and slowly bringing your values? It's almost how much do you care about the quality of those pencil marks? The slower, the better. The softer, the better. And the longer, the better. Generally speaking, it allows you to make good decisions without losing track of small little pieces of a puzzle, one by one. Since I'm doing soft values, light values, I'm going to blend them even more into the paper. And you want to do that also very soft. Very patient. Is it blind? Blind? Am I really just looking at my reference the whole time? It applies. You really, really want to see the shape and capture that value. So the amount of time you spend looking at your reference will show on your drawing. The more time you analyze, you spend analyzing, looking, until you actually see it, without a doubt, it will show. And then obviously a little understanding of anatomy, but not even, it's the fundamentals. Forgetting that you're drawing a face and beginning to understand and see everything that's convex and concave as just a study of light. You see the roundness because you see the shadow. And then we caress our way. Now another thing I want to show you is the way I'm holding the pencil. I'm holding it all the way at the tip with extremely light pressure. The pressure is almost zero, where my thumb and my index barely hold the pencil. It could literally fall off the hand. And the weight of the pencil, as I need a little more, I'll just put that amount of pressure on the tip of the pencil. But it's about repetition, it's about direction. And can you begin to see? Can you begin to see those delicate values that will really be a big payoff? So if you've ever worked with a 4H or a 2H, 2H is great, but if you can someday work with a 4H or a 6H pencil, highly, highly recommended. No matter what level of contrast, how light or dark you like your drawings, it adds an entire dimension, as you can see here. Can I go lighter than this? Yeah. Slowly, the buildup gives me more. I don't have to be as careful. I don't have to try as hard to stay light because the pencil is light. And let's blend it. Now with blending, there's, as I mentioned, so many different techniques. And I want to begin to be more careful. Right now it's big, simple areas, big, simple shapes. But almost like a ghost, it starts appearing out of the page. And I know we want to move a little bit faster. But this is easily a portrait that could be a 4-6 hour portrait. Imagine that, a 4-6 hour meditation where you become familiar with every single millimeter of someone's face, forgetting that you're drawing a face, really focusing on understanding and analyzing how light works. And then eventually forgetting about light, just having fun with the technique as you define the light. I'm going to go ahead and switch from 6H. I'm going to go to a 2H. And you're going to see a drastic change here. I have been keeping it really soft. So I want to be very careful because I'm going to begin to see a little more line. Right now it's kind of like those washes that we did with the ink. If I would have kept them really, really light in the beginning. But because I jumped to a 2H, you're going to see a little more line rather than the shape of the values. Beginning to see where you need more contrast, leaving a little room for the transition, not having to do double work. Most of these areas will just be in the 2B, 4B range in terms of value. But you do want those softer transitions. As you begin to layer, you also have to be more careful with the blending of those layers. You could undo a lot of the work that you've done already. but it's about managing your pace. And really paying attention to how you manage that pace. If you feel a little bit rushed, how do you bring yourself back to slow down that pace? Remember to look at your reference. That's the key. How many times have you squinted at your reference? It's the trick. It's the secret to seeing values. The harder you squint, the easier you're going to see what needs to be black, what needs to be light. We're talking about shapes and the value of those shapes. In squinting, you see them clearly and you find them right away. But then the patience to bring that render. Showcasing your skill of pencil marks or ink marks. Let's do a little more blending. And I am using the paper blender here a little softer, preserving some of the earlier layers, earlier lines, but just adding a little more transition, a little more volume, a little gradient. So yes, 2H, we could spend hours and hours here. Let's speed it up a little. I'm going to go to HB. Beginning to see drastic changes now. We're adding B pencil, so you'll see it immediately. So it is a lot harder. So even from the sound, if you could hear the sound, the caress becomes super soft. A little bit slower. I also mentioned making sure you have sharp tools in order to provide the best line, quality of line. And little by little, bringing it up slowly. That level of contrast begins to appear here and there. It literally just pops up. Timing, you're blending, and not rushing. Question, can I just go from 2H to HB and then put a little 6B so I can come back to my HB where I see that? Yes, of course. You develop your own technique the way you see fit. If it works, absolutely. You could start the opposite way. It actually doesn't work as well because hard pencils do not blend into soft pencils. Wherever there's a soft pencil, meaning 6B, 4B, 2B, when you bring in an H over that, it doesn't really work that well. So with this HB, let's go into bigger areas of gray. Now, it may seem like, well, I'm being super cautious. No, there's looseness in every mark. You want to maintain that looseness. Notice the grip. You want somewhat loose, gestural. These are a little more controlled. Yes, what we're doing is looking closer, going a little bit slower, analyzing and blending. It literally almost is a test of patience. A test of how patient can you be. It is what's required for this type of drawing. A lot of analyzing, managing, patience, pace, obviously developing. The values requires observation skill. But we know that because it's for every drawing that we do that. Let's start defining some of these areas just a little bit more, and you'll begin to see it coming together a lot faster. And I'm talking about very soft here with our eyebrow. So just a little bit of drawing, looking for that angle, that relationship, and slowly bringing up the value as I try to capture the placement, the shape, a little bit of the proportion. So this is nerve-wracking, going from shading, just into drawing. But that is the beauty of using that image transfer. You can spend 2, 3, 4 hours just focused on what a lot of people find the fun part. Technically, yes, it's drawing, but without having to draw it from the get-go, the structuring, it still isn't easy. I say this all the time. To do an image transfer and capture a full drawing, you can't just image transfer your whole image. You're going to have to draw it. And what do you draw? Well, some of the lines, most of the values, almost all of the values, the lights and shadows, which is the entire secret to good drawing, good fun drawing. So absolutely, it's a great exercise. Doing a little more drawing, figuring out placement, some of these shapes. HB, I'm going to go ahead and move a little faster to 2B. And as I mentioned, it's going to go from 2B to 4B to 6B, hopefully all the way to 8B. And I'm going to add just a touch of contrast here. The first really looking at cast shadow slowly. Very, very slow. Build up just enough. To then blend that in. Right back into all the work we've done. And begin to see how that shadow reads. I've mentioned using a circular motion for blending, especially when you're working with the round forms of a face. It is almost cheating the way it just develops the form. It's so accurate. I mean, there's hardly any way to overdo it. Obviously, it can be done, so be careful. But with round forms, you're capturing the direction no matter what, unless you really have a flat area that you don't want to blend or round. It's hard to think of, because then you begin to deal with the texture look of it. Let's bring our friend here. And it was probably the paper blender, it just got a little heavy. So with a little bit of kneaded eraser, I'm going to lift just a touch. And yeah, sometimes transition from one pencil to to a softer pencil does cause drastic shifts. That smoothness that we were working with early on, all H. Once you bring in a B pencil, it really, the word would be pollutes everything else. It just takes over when you're blending because it's softer. Which is why you want to go slow and develop it nice, patient, gradually, slowly. I'm going to use that same 2B and just add a few lines right down here. Just shaping a little bit the shadow. Under the upper lip and under the lower lip, just a little more under the nose and in the nostril. So just those touches of 2B. Doing all of this just by literally squinting my way through it. As it continues to build up, you want to stay really, look at the pressure, look at the grip. You want to do this slowly. You don't want any hard pressure at any stage, all the way to the end. It should be soft, light pressure. The buildup comes from saturating slowly and patiently. Add a little more contrast just to see. And very light. It's not extreme. I'm not going to the darkest. It may be darker eventually, but I'm just adding a little bit of contrast to this cast shadow under the ear, it helps me see this better. And also for blending. Although it does have a sharp edge, this shadow, it will help. You begin to see it closer. You begin to see it better. You begin to see it sharper. Sometimes you want to have different blenders for different pencils. So you would have more than one blender. If you're working with lots of H pencil and then you jump to the B pencils, you would have some blenders for those specific switches for the B pencils. And keep the lighter ones for those H pencils, which don't stain your paper blender as much, and then don't bring that graphite to areas of your drawing that you don't want to. It gives you just that level of extra control. I think it's time for the 2B to begin to add just a little more. So here my posture, even my posture, I want my arm loose, shoulder, elbow, wrist off the paper, everything free flowing, good range of movement. Obviously, we've said it over and over. Loose, light, and at this point I'm just going to add the curve, and I'm filling in, noticing those areas of darker and light, but I want to keep it uniform. It's an area that will be very easy to come back to and add or subtract. What I want is match these volumes, the curving and the shaping of them. For that, you want to match the direction, which is with all your practice comes in handy. The different types of lines, all of your beautiful mark making, all of the gesture. Just so you know, there's curve to these lines, mimicking the shape, the body, the volume of the hair. Working my way up and working from a little bit from the shadow, darker areas into the light. Same thing here. Not losing track. You have to understand your subject is a portrait, but part of your subject here now is understanding hair and how hair behaves. How it hangs and drops and curves and holds and stands out in some cases. How it bunches. So a little bit of that concept, but we're just, again, identifying shape and volume here. So how does it work to keep that in mind? Both of those things. Well, you are aware where you are. And that's what I meant by just a little understanding of, I mentioned anatomy here about how hair generally would behave. And then with that knowledge, identify value and shape. Not forgetting about the texture and the curves that you may want to bring in here to just aid, to help it look more like that thing. Really interesting curve here. Usually causes problem. So I'll go backwards, meaning from here I start back at this side and then sort of meet them in the middle. And there it works. Now remembering that this is the type of light study, portrait study, where you could take any approach as you work with any medium, and it's not about likeness. In this case, I'm working with light study, which is really truly focused on matching the values and the shape of those values. It happens to look more like a nice portrait, good, but don't forget what it is you're doing. You are, number one, continuing to practice observation skills, focus skills, technical skills, and in the case of mixed media, experimenting skills. This portrait, it's just an excuse. So the likeness should not be the thing that holds you back. Oh, it's not looking like the... No, it's about everything else. It could look like, I said it before, like a foot. But it'll be one beautiful drawing if you were really, truly working your way through one of those things or several of those things. It's going to get really interesting, more complex here. So I break down some of these shapes and I begin to just add material, graphite. And I'm going to do it by flattening the pencil just a little more. And I'll begin to add just a little zigzag to the line, which will also add imitation to the texture. Also want to keep in mind the light and how all of this is working. And this is going to bring us to a whole new place where it will begin to look finished. And just because we're adding so much material here, so much contrast already, you begin to see how this works, which is why I started the opposite way. Well, I think the way you should. Generally the biggest, simplest, but here we wanted to start with the lightest, since it would be the main, in my case, main focus of study. This over here, too easy. Clearing my area for better view of my subject. We could always add a little more of that texture. when working with clothing, fabric, great opportunities, always great opportunities to really go into abstract. Understanding how that works. Just mark making. Remember, I also said as you begin to approach what you think is the end of your drawing, don't rush. Don't rush. Adding a little extra gesture to these lines using the side of the pencil and that parallel, sort of parallel hatch, but it's more of a zigzag, giving this piece of clothing just a little more character. And I could maybe bring in a little bit of blending. Sometimes you don't want to overblend things. It begins to look bland. You want that gesture of the line showing up. And as I thought, maybe too risky to use blending down in this area. Having fun with these marks as you identify that they begin to, well, they're always yours, but I mentioned that signature characteristic of your pencil marks. No matter how hard anyone tries, they could never, ever forge that signature style that only you can add to how you see and how you bring the pencil mark doing most of this blind, looking only at my reference, glancing down half a second, almost looks like a landscape down here. Completely valid. So there it is. I like it. I like that, the way that looks. And moving from 2B, I will go to 4B. So 4B, I'm looking for more contrast. Lots of squinting. Missed out a little 2B here. Got to go back to 2B really quick. Want to add just a transition of light right in here. Get away from that fabric line that I was just doing, back to hair. So what does it do? Weight, flow, direction, curvature. Still same grip, just holding it a little shorter to control some of that curve, some of that gesture, but still same grip. Now I go to the 4B. So using 4B, I'm going to once again, step by step, go, oof, wow. You see immediately how it pops as it blends into that previous layer. And you could see much clearer what you're going to want to do. By using the previous layer, and I'm going to give you a close-up look of this. How I'm literally just combing hair here. And you see the light effects on it? All of it by managing shape and value. Well, now we're dealing with layers too. How you're developing those layers. Some of that line gesture. Beginning to loosen up the hair. So it's not just patches. It actually flows. Notice how I'm not blending as much anymore. It's all about combination of lines now. And using those previous layers to bring in new gestures. And then working my way all the way through this area. Carefully softening. That transition. If I were to blend some of these areas, it most likely would be with this, with the brush, soft, not too hard, so you could still see the line and just play with some of that light a little bit. But let me go back into this area here, area of the features. There we are. And this, I really want a sharp pencil for this area. And a good close look. Once again, using all the way through, same grip. Maximize the use of those early layers. Don't overwork them out of existence by putting just heavier, softer, darker pencil over them, but have them showcase, show up all the way through and add. So the expertise of your pencil lines and layering and different mark making here is where at the end you can really complete that illusion. Having some of these pencils blending. Any tiny mark you make really brings this to life. Or pushes it to a direction where going too far. So that's why you want to be delicate and minimalistic. You really want to minimalize most of these gestures to abstract reads of value. Gets a little darker. What's the shape of it? There it is. We're not drawing what you think you're drawing in your mind, that the word for, well, let me just say it, the eye. No, it's just a couple of geometric, sometimes non-describable shapes with a variation of values. And that variation of value can even fool you for a second. Ooh, how did that just pop up like that? Trick your own mind into the illusion. That's what we want. We know how we begin to develop it. We've been seeing it for a while now. But now we don't see anything else but what we envisioned. But we still see that the marks were small, obviously darker, just a tiny bit more complex, but carefully orchestrated. Going back and forth from these two reeds of contrast that I see here, from here to here, trying to match that. Because remember, one affects the other. And we do have lots of shapes and features in here. Do it slowly. We'll bring in some blending here. Have to. Very delicate. Little by little. Remember, I can always bring back just a little bit of eraser, and it will happen. Forget the thing you know it is, that I word, and find a way to see abstract elements. Geometric, hopefully. Isolating one small area from the next. And there we got it. I'm going to be using some of the shadow here. Very delicate blending, very delicate use of line. Realize, is this the proper technique for this? What I'm looking for over here? Is it delivering? Let me go ahead and bring just a little bit of eraser right in here. Still not quite there yet. Need a little more contrast of light. I'm going to go ahead and jump to 6B, right in this area. Very lightly, very carefully. Wow, just that tiny touch. Immediately added what I was looking for. That punch. That it's just delicate, sporadic. It's not all over. And it was literally a few tiny lines. It wasn't even heavy use of line here. Understanding how to bring those elements, make them work for you, not against you. Just a tiny bit more shadow under this eyelid at the top of it, and a little extra contrast on the opposite side. The use of light coming back into this area is going to be what really does it. There it is. With a little extra value and a little more roundness on the upper side. Right here. Let's go back and see what that's looking like. I know it looks a little dark here. I'm going to bring back that eraser. I wanted to make it grayer, heavier, so I could bring some of that light. And with caution, we're going to bring in this small eraser here first. Kneaded eraser is also a great tool here. And I'm going to be drawing back a little bit of light back into it with a few sharper edges, just a little cleaner. A little bit more of that bone structure. This is why you want to keep it soft. Switching back to 4B, 6B, back and forth, finishing up some of these lines. Very few lines. And I will do just a little bit of blending so I could round the light and into the shadow of the lips. And then on the opposite side and at the bottom. And just a few of the textures of it. Meaning some of those creases, some of those breaks of shadow and light. Very, very delicate, very close, but not much work. Again, you can literally count the lines. Bring a little extra. This is 4B, but I'll have to do it again with 6B. Just a little bit underneath. I'm going to go ahead and blend that again. Soft. Round. And there we have it. Coming very, very close to finish. Which, by the way, it's the most important part. When is it finished? How much further do I need to go?